The leader that I'm going to talk about today is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, or more commonly known as Mahatma Gandhi. He was born on October 2nd, 1869, in a coastal city in India called Porbandar, located in the west of India. Mahatma Gandhi was the youngest child of his father's fourth wife, Karamchand Gandhi, which was his father, and was the Diwan of Porbandar. The Diwan is the chief minister of a small state in western India. His mother, Pulibai Gandhi, was a very religious woman. She was a devoted practitioner of Vaishnavism, which is the worship of the Hindu god Vishnu, the protector and preserver of the universe. The family also believed in Jainism, a religion whose beliefs are non-violence and the belief that everything in the universe is eternal. This influenced Gandhi's context greatly, making him believe in ahimsa, to not injure any living beings, vegetarianism, and to fast for self-purification. Since Porbandar was not an advanced area, they had very bad primary school education, where they would learn very basic material. Since Gandhi married at the age of 13, he actually missed out on 1 year of school. However, after joining a different school, he then moved on to go to England to join the Inner Temple in September of 1888. The Inner Temple was one of the 4 law schools in England at the time, where he studied to become a barrister. A barrister is a type of lawyer in very common law jurisdictions who worked at higher level courtrooms. These barristers usually specialized in courtroom advocacy and litigation. After spending 3 years there, he came back to India to find work. His work brought him to Africa for 1 year in an Indian law firm. While Gandhi was still in South Africa, there were many laws put in place by the British government that racially discriminated the Indian population. The first example was the Immigration Law Amendment Bill of 1895. This law stated that Indians had to return to India after their 5-year indenture period. Anyone who refused to do so were charged taxes of £3 annually. There were also a series of laws called the Black Act that demanded that every Indian were to register for a thumbprint certificate. Unregistered immigrants and immigrants who weren't allowed in would be jailed or deported. Lastly, the British implemented a law that did not recognize the marriage of Hindu people. Gandhi's reaction to this was to set up a non-violent resistance that took the form of a march to cross the border illegally. This march resulted in an agreement between Gandhi and General Smuts of the British government. The £3 tax and Black Act was abolished. The immigration restriction was less severe, and Hindu marriages were recognized in exchange for the protesting to stop. I'll first talk about some background information about India. The Sepoy Mutiny was a rebellion that lasted 18 months, from 1857 to 1858. This was caused by the belief that lubricant used in cartridges were made out of a mixture of pig and cow lard, which insulted both Muslim and Hindu religion. These people were the only organized military group, and therefore rebelled, committing many atrocities. This resulted in a British victory, and mistrust, fear, and hatred from both sides. After the indirect control over India by the British East India Company, which was weakened by the Sepoy Mutiny, the British sent in government officials that took over India directly. They implemented more rules that favored and developed England. The British government also created inequality of rights such as voting rights and the government rights between British and the Indians. There is one important example of a right that was proposed that I will talk about. The Rowlatt Acts basically allowed political cases to be tried without juries and allowed the jailing of suspects without trials. These would only apply to Indians. Gandhi replied with the first major satyagraha, nonviolent resistance, that was resentment towards the Rowlatt Act, and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where a few hundred protesters were massacred at a meeting. The Non-Cooperation Act was aimed at establishing Swaraj, self-government, and it took the form of a national protest where all factories and offices were closed, and Indian people withdrew from all British schools, police, military, and civil services. Lawyers left the British courts, and public transportation and goods made by the British were boycotted. While this movement ultimately failed due to the rising violence, this was a catalyst towards the movement leading to Indian independence. When British officials came to India, they brought commercialization of agriculture along with them. To increase the British income, they increased the production of commercial crops such as tea, coffee, indigo, opium, cotton, jute, sugarcane, and oilseed. This increase of commercial crop production led to a decrease in production of food grain, crops that had the purpose of consumption. This led to famine, drought, and put a large majority of the Indians at risk for starvation and disease. The British also imposed heavy taxes. A prominent example were the British salt tax, which not only prohibited Indians to collect or sell salt, it also forced them to buy salt from the British, who had a monopoly over salt. This means that they had full control over the manufacture and sale of salt. They also implemented a heavy salt tax. Since salt was an important aspect in the Indian diet, they had to purchase this expensive product. To oppose this, Gandhi decided to create Satyagraha campaign, which is a form of nonviolent protest against the British government by conducting a 385-kilometer march on March 12, 1930, from the western Indian town of Sabarmati to the town of Dandi, which is on the Arabian Sea coast. They then proceeded to break the salt laws by picking up handfuls of salt and continued marching. This march is now known as the Salt March, and at the end of the year, around 60,000 peaceful protesters were put in jail. In January of 1931, after negotiations between Gandhi and the British Viceroy of India, they agreed to let all the prisoners go, and to allow Indians to produce salt for domestic use. This was called the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, signed on March 5th of 1931. This contributed positively towards helping to solve the famine and economic problem that plagued most Indians. So what is a leader? A leader is an individual who directly makes a significant and lasting impact on the people or place around him or her that continues to influence the people to the future. Gandhi was a huge contributor and leader towards the resistance towards the British imperial forces by the Indians, and it was by his leadership and values that the Indians brought change using a non-violent resistance. His impact is the leading of the campaign resulting in India's freedom and the inspiration that he left for other leaders in the future, such as Martin Luther King Jr. and the Dalai Lama. Gandhi became a leader in July of 1894 in South Africa. The reason of him becoming a leader started in the observance of racial discrimination against Indians by the British while working for 1 year as a lawyer in South Africa. Since the British also imperialized South Africa at the time he was working there, he encountered a few cases of racial discrimination against him. He was once thrown out of a first-class railway compartment as he refused to give up his seat for a European passenger. He was also beaten up by a white driver as he refused to travel on footboard in order to make room for a European passenger. He was also not allowed in certain hotels, as they are reserved for only Europeans. While he was about to leave for India, he noticed that the Natal Legislative Assembly was considering to sign a bill which aimed to take away the right to vote for Indians. As a result, in the month of July, he started his 7 years of leading a resistance in South Africa. It was then when he started to draft petitions for the British officials, which were signed by hundreds of people, aimed at preventing the bill to deprive Indians of the right to vote. In 1894, he then founded a political group called the Natal Indian Congress. This was a group that aimed to fight against Indian discrimination in South Africa. This group impacted South Africa by carrying out marches against laws imposed by British imperialism that discriminated against Indians. Examples of this were the £3 tax law, marriage restriction law, and the Black Act. This made Gandhi a leader as he made a significant and lasting impact on the Indian people of South Africa by abolishing some discriminatory laws and continuing to influence them in the future by creating the Natal Indian Congress, that later joins hands with the African National Congress, led by Nelson Mandela, to further oppose the British imperialism. This means that Gandhi started to become a leader in South Africa in July of 1894. Gandhi's main principle of resistance was Satyagraha, which is the idea of non-violent resistance. All of his marches and campaigns against imperialism were based on this idea. This originated from his mother's religion and belief that he was passed down to him, called Jainism. Jainism is a religion whose beliefs are non-violence. However, Gandhi as a leader was heavily influenced by the time and place in which he lived in. I believe in a theory called the Great Man Theory. The Great Man Theory states that leaders were born and not made, and that great leaders will arise when there is great need. Gandhi was born with the important characteristics of a leader, which is his non-violent approach to solving problems, but he only became a leader due to the events that occurred to him at the time. These events were the racism and discrimination towards him in South Africa during his one-year stay from 1893 to 1894, and the attempt to pass a bill that would deprive the Indians of a right to vote in South Africa. As a result, he continued to work towards freedom in Africa and became the widely known leader. I think that if Gandhi was not born in India and to his set of beliefs, and if he didn't go to South Africa to work, he would have either become a leader under different conditions, or someone else would have taken the role of leading the Indians against British imperialism. To conclude, Gandhi was a very important leader and served as an inspiration to many world leaders after him. His idea of non-violent resistance guided Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement, Nelson Mandela advocating for African rights in South Africa, and Cesar Chavez for public support for Latino farm workers. I hope you learned something from me today about Mahatma Gandhi. Thank you for listening.